A lot of companies like Google use free software to render their services and they charge money from people.
That's okay.
That's okay.
I'm not against making money.
So do you think these companies should free up their software?
Well, that's a different question. Remember, a lot of the software they use is custom software, which they develop or they pay someone else to develop for them, and they just use it. Now, in some cases, it may be that a certain program is so important for society that you could say that they have a moral duty to release it. But most of the time, I don't think so. And they're not subjugating somebody else if they're the only user. All the users have freedom. Now, the idea of the 4 freedoms is you're free to redistribute if you wish, but you're not required to. And they're not required to. These 4 freedoms are not the only ethical issue that ever relates to software. If there were a program that were tremendously important for society, there could be an argument that you have a duty to release it. But obviously that doesn't apply to most software that's merely useful.
What about Google Search? I mean, that's something that a lot of people use, and it's implemented using a lot of free software.
Yeah. Well, they're fine. They're welcome to use free software.
Yeah, right, sure. And people are free to use search. But do these ideas apply back to Google? Should they be...
Well, a website is a totally different kind of entity from a program. Remember, a program is something you can copy. Your computer could copy it.
Sure.
A website is a physical thing. It's a computer with stuff in it. Totally different kind of entity. It makes no sense. No, they're totally different. Now, they both affect your freedom, but they affect it in totally different ways. Now, using a search engine is not your computation. It's a computation being done mainly on their data. So, okay, how could you have control over it? Its job is to look through their data. On the other hand, there are things that people do with network servers that really are their own personal computations, like editing your email, like a spreadsheet, say, or a word processor. And if you use somebody else's server to do these things, you're giving up the control. And it doesn't actually matter whether they're using free software. It doesn't matter if they release the software. Suppose somebody writes a web-based spreadsheet and releases it as free software, and also installs it on a web server. And you use that server to do a spreadsheet task. You've lost control. The program is available to you as free software. You could install it on your own computer. You could install it on your own server. And if you did, you'd have control again, because you'd be using your copy. But while you use his copy, you don't have control, even if he's releasing it. So there is an issue of how these servers affect your control over your own computing, but it's a totally different issue.
How much should we value that? I mean, if I use this spreadsheet that's...
I think you should value it a lot. It's dangerous if you don't. Remember, under the USAC Riot Act, the FBI can legally get information about you from a company without even a court order. The rules they have to go through are pretty lax, but they don't even obey those. This was news recently. A DOJ investigator found that the FBI doesn't obey these lax requirements for getting information about you from companies. So you shouldn't trust that. And of course, they could be playing you false in various ways. It could be a free program, but they customized it to do something nasty. They could drop your data. A few years ago, I read an article, a lawyer said that some major ISP had thrown away his email and his address list and terminated his account because the Bush regime just asked them to. And at first they told him it was a technical failure, but eventually they admitted that they had been asked to do this. He was never able to get it back. The reason, he said, was that he was representing some people that the Bush regime didn't want to have legal representation.
thinking that idea further, let's say you just have servers that forward your email.
It's
And-
hard to avoid that, but at least they're not doing much. Basically,
they could have a copy of
the
it.
point is that this is a totally different kind of issue. There's an issue here, but you can't hope to transplant the conclusions from the other issue. They don't fit.
From my experience, it seems like a lot of time and energy is spent reverse engineering devices to get drivers to work. Wouldn't it be easier or more beneficial to extend the freedoms to hardware as well as software?
Well, yes and no. After all, they don't make sense for hardware. What? Okay, freedom to modify it. Well, you can't modify a chip. Nobody can.
Well, but you
And
modify
freedom
the
to copy it. There are no copiers for hardware. So that these freedoms don't make sense. Now you can have the freedom for the designs, but since turning the design into real hardware takes something that costs millions of dollars, that's not going to do us much good either. That's not the issue. What we need to get for these devices is the specs. We don't even need to know their designs. We need their specs, which is much less. So we're asking for much less. And even that, some companies won't give us. But at least we've got a better chance of pressuring them to give us a smaller thing.
Is that because a lot of their functionality is achieved through software to the hardware?
Sometimes, but we're not asking for for them to make the internal software free if it's in a ROM. They just have to tell us the interface specs, and that's the interface specs between the hardware product and our computer. Maybe they do have a driver which has some powerful functionality, but we're not asking them to give us that code. We'll write our own driver which does what we need.
Were there any dilemmas for you in choosing to pattern GNU after Unix?
Not much. I mean, I did have one other alternative I was considering for a few months, and that was to pattern it after the MIT Lisp machine.
Thank you.
But I eventually concluded that that wouldn't run efficiently on the most modern future computer hardware.
One of the debates that's been going on for a while now is the classic Mac versus Windows. And
They're both proprietary software, so they're both banned.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Please take a look at the books and shirts and other things available outside. It's a way to support